When humans came, the entire galaxy was forced to confront their wrath. Part 1. The morning sun rose over the fields of New Daegu, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Park Yuna stood on the balcony of the administration building and watched the farmers begin their work. She had been the colony administrator for 12 years now, and she still loved these quiet moments before the day truly started. New Daegu was a small world on the outer edge of Galactic Union space. 12,000 humans lived here, growing crops and raising families far from the busy centers of galactic civilization. They traded their harvest with neighboring alien species and lived peaceful lives. The galaxy was a big place, and most species paid little attention to humans. They were considered a minor race, not important enough to notice. Yuna did not mind this. She preferred peace to importance. In the security office below, Quan Taiho reviewed the morning reports. He was a large man with gray hair and a face marked by old scars. 20 years ago, he had served in Earth's military. Now he protected farmers and children, and he was content with that change. The most exciting thing that happened on New Daegu was the occasional equipment failure or lost child who wandered too far from home. Han Jishu sat at her communications station, monitoring the usual morning traffic. She was only 23 years old, fresh from training on Earth. She had taken this assignment because she wanted adventure among the stars. So far, the biggest adventure had been learning to like the local vegetables. At exactly 9:47 in the morning, everything changed. Jisu's screens lit up with warning signals. She stared at them for a long moment, not understanding what she was seeing. Then her training took over, and her hands moved across the controls. "Sir," she called to Taiho, her voice shaking. "We have ships entering orbit. Many ships. They are not responding to hails." Taiho moved to her station and looked at the readings. His face went pale. "Those are Velthari warships," he said quietly. "Get Administrator Park, now." The Velthari Dominion was one of the major powers in the galaxy. They were a reptilian species, tall and strong, with scales that shimmered like metal. They were known for their pride and their cruelty. They did not usually bother with small human colonies. Park Yuna arrived in the communications room just as the lead Velthari ship opened a channel. The face that appeared on the screen was cold and arrogant. Commander Rethax of the Velthari Third Fleet looked at the humans with obvious disgust. "I am Commander Rethax," he announced. "This world now belongs to the Velthari Dominion. You have 1 hour to evacuate your people. Take only what you can carry. Everything else becomes our property." Yuna stepped forward, keeping her voice calm and professional. "Commander, this is a legally established colony under Galactic Union protection. You cannot simply claim it. Let us discuss this peacefully." Rethax laughed. It was a harsh, unpleasant sound. "The Galactic Union?" he said. "They will do nothing. You are humans. A weak species. A minor species. No one cares what happens to you." "Please," Yuna said. "We have families here. Children. Give us time to contact our government. There must be a way to resolve this without violence." Rethax tilted his head, studying her with cold eyes. "You do not seem to understand your position," he said. "Let me make it clear." He turned to someone off-screen and gave an order in his own language. Moments later, a bright flash lit the sky outside the window. The ground shook. Alarms began screaming throughout the colony. Jisoo checked her readings and felt her heart stop. "The hospital," she whispered. They hit the hospital. 300 people had been in that building. Patients, doctors, nurses. An entire wing had been dedicated to children with minor illnesses and injuries. They were all gone in an instant, burned to ash by weapons fired from orbit. Yuna stood frozen, her mind unable to process what had just happened. She could hear screaming from outside. She could see smoke rising where the hospital had stood. You now have 50 minutes, Rithak said, his voice bored. I suggest you use them wisely. The screen went dark. Taiho grabbed Yuna's arm. We need to evacuate, he said. We cannot fight warships with farming equipment. Yuna nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the smoke outside. Get everyone to the emergency shelters, she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Hollow. Do it now. But there was nowhere to run. The Valkyrie had ships in orbit and troops landing at every major road. Within hours, the colonists of New Daegu were rounded up and marched to hastily constructed detention camps. They were given little food and no medical care. The Valkyrie guards treated them worse than animals. Jisoo worked frantically at her console before the soldiers came. She knew she only had minutes. Her hands flew across the controls as she recorded everything. The attack, the demands, the destruction of the hospital, the number of dead. She compressed the file and aimed it at the nearest relay station. The Valkyrie were jamming most communications, but she found a tiny gap in their coverage. She pushed the signal through with every bit of power she could manage. A Valkyrie soldier burst through the door just as she finished. He grabbed her and threw her to the ground. She did not fight back. She did not need to. The message was already traveling through space at the speed of light, bouncing from relay to relay, racing toward Earth. In the detention camp, Yuna sat with the survivors and tried to comfort them. Mothers wept for children lost in the hospital. Fathers stared at nothing, their eyes empty. The Valkyrie walked among them, kicking anyone who moved too slowly, laughing at their tears. Commander Rethax visited the camp that evening. He walked through the rows of prisoners with his hands clasped behind his back, like a farmer inspecting livestock. You see, he announced loudly, this is what happens to weak species. You had your chance at peace. You chose to argue. Now you will work for us until we decide you are no longer useful. Taiho watched him with burning eyes. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to attack, to fight, to do something. But he was surrounded by guards with weapons. If he moved, they would kill him and probably 20 other prisoners as punishment. So he stayed still and let his hatred grow. The Valkyrie did not notice the way the humans looked at them. They did not see the quiet fury building behind the tears. They had conquered many species over the centuries. The weak ones always cried and begged. The humans would be no different. 4 days later, on Earth, Admiral Baek Donghae sat in his office reviewing routine reports. He was an old man with white hair and a face that rarely showed emotion. He had served humanity for 40 years and had seen many terrible things. He thought nothing could surprise him anymore. Then his aide brought him a message marked with the highest priority codes. It had come from a colony called New Daegu. Admiral Baek read the message once. Then he read it again. His hands began to shake. Not with fear, not with sorrow, with something far more dangerous. He pressed a button on his desk. Get me the Defense Council, he said. His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly cold. All of them, now. The aide heard something in that voice that made his blood run cold. In 40 years of service, he had never heard the Admiral sound like that. On a small colony world at the edge of space, the Valkyrie continued their occupation, satisfied with their easy victory. They had no idea that they had just made the worst mistake in the history of their civilization. They had made humanity angry. When humans came, the entire galaxy was forced to confront their wrath. Part 2. The news spread across human space like fire through dry grass. New Daegu, the hospital, the children. Every human world heard the story within days, and every human world responded with the same cold fury. Admiral Baek Donghae stood before the Defense Council and presented the evidence. He showed them the recordings from Han Jisoo. He showed them the faces of the dead. He showed them Commander Rethax laughing as the hospital burned. When he finished, there was silence in the chamber. Then the council voted. The decision was unanimous. For the first time in 50 years of membership in the Galactic Union, humanity would go to war. On the diplomatic front, Shin Yunji prepared to address the Galactic Council. She was 45 years old, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She had spent 20 years navigating the complex politics of alien civilizations. She knew exactly how the Council would respond to her demands. She went anyway. The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, built to hold representatives from over 300 species. Most of them were present when Yunji walked to the central platform. Humans rarely addressed the full council. They were considered too unimportant. Distinguished representatives, Yunji began, her voice clear and steady. 5 days ago, forces of the Velthari Dominion attacked a peaceful human colony. They destroyed a hospital filled with patients and children. They killed 300 innocent people. They have imprisoned the survivors and claimed our world as their property. She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably. Most did not react at all. We demand justice, Yunji continued. We demand that the Galactic Union enforce its own laws. We demand that the Velthari be held responsible for this act of war. The Velthari ambassador rose from his seat. His name was Kurthax, and he was even larger than Commander Rethax. He looked at Yunji the way a predator looks at small prey. The human speaks of laws, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. But she forgets that laws protect the strong, not the weak. New Daegu sits on valuable resources that the Dominion requires. We took what we needed. This is the way of the galaxy. And the children? Yunji asked quietly. Did you need to kill children? Kurthax waved his hand dismissively. Unfortunate. But humans breed quickly. You will make more. A sound passed through the chamber. Some species laughed. Others remained silent. None of them spoke in humanity's defense. Yunji looked around the vast room at the representatives of hundreds of civilizations. She saw indifference. She saw amusement. She saw a species who had dealt with humans for decades and decided they were harmless. She smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I see, she said. The Galactic Union will not help us. You have made your position clear. She turned to face Kurthax directly. And you, Ambassador, you have made your position clear as well. What will you do? Kurthax laughed. Humans are traitors, farmers. You have never fought a real war. You do not have the stomach for it. You are right, Yunji replied. We have not fought a war in a very long time. We almost forgot how. She paused. Almost. She gathered her documents and walked toward the exit. At the door, she stopped and looked back at the assembly. Remember this day, she said. Remember that we came to you for justice and you laughed at us. Remember that you chose to do nothing. Her voice hardened. Because what happens next will be your fault as much as theirs. She left the chamber without looking back. Behind her, the representatives returned to their normal business. A few wondered what the human meant by her words. Most forgot about her within minutes. They would remember soon enough. Across human space, the military machine awakened. Ships that had been in storage for decades were pulled from their berths and made ready for war. Factories that had been building consumer goods switched to weapons production. Young men and women lined up at recruitment centers. So many that there was no room for all of them. Captain Ruminho stood on the bridge of the battleship, unyielding, and watched his crew prepare for departure. He was a veteran of border conflicts, small skirmishes with pirates and minor species who thought humans were easy targets. Those fights had been quick and one-sided. The aggressors had learned their mistake and retreated. This would be different. The Velthari were not pirates. They were one of the major powers of the galaxy, with a fleet that outnumbered humanity's forces 3-1. They had been conquering worlds for centuries before humans even reached the stars. But Minho had seen the recordings from New Daegu. He had seen the hospital burning. He had seen the children's ward explode. He was not afraid. He was ready. Admiral Beak assembled the fleet commanders for a final briefing. 200 warships had gathered at the staging point, the largest human fleet in history. It was still not enough to match the Velthari in a straight fight. "We are not going to fight fair," Beak told his commanders. "We are going to fight smart. We are going to hit them where they do not expect. We are going to make them afraid." He outlined the battle plan. Strike fast. Strike hard. Never give the enemy time to recover. Accept losses that would make other species surrender. Keep fighting until the mission was complete. "Some of you will not come home," Beak said, his voice steady. "I will not lie to you about that. But every one of you knows what happened on New Daegu. Every one of you knows why we are here." He looked at each commander in turn, meeting their eyes. "Our people are in chains. Our children are dead. The galaxy has told us that no one cares what happens to humans. We are going to show them how wrong they are." The commanders returned to their ships. The crews made final preparations. Messages were sent home to families, just in case. Some people cried. Most did not. There would be time for tears later. Now was the time for focus. Captain Ru Minho addressed his own crew in the main hangar bay of the Unyielding. Hundreds of sailors and soldiers stood at attention, waiting for his words. "We are not going to New Daegu for glory," he said. "We are not going for conquest or revenge. We are going because our people need us. Because when humans are in trouble, other humans come to help. That is who we are. That is what we do." He paused, looking at the faces before him. Young faces and old faces. Scared faces and determined faces. All of them ready. "The Velthari think we are weak," Minho continued. "They think we will bend and break. They are wrong. We are humans. We do not break. We fight until the fighting is done, and then we help each other pick up the pieces." A cheer rose from the crew, echoing through the metal corridors of the ship. On the bridge, the navigation officer received the final coordinates. The engines hummed with power. The stars outside began to stretch and blur as the ship prepared to enter hyperspace. Minho took his seat in the command chair and gave the order that would change galactic history. "All ships," he said, "jump." 200 human warships vanished into hyperspace, leaving nothing behind but the fading glow of their engines. They moved as one force, one purpose, one unstoppable wave of fury. Behind them, in the halls of the Galactic Council, the representatives continued their endless debates. They had already forgotten about the angry human diplomat and her dramatic exit. The Velthari Dominion had already forgotten about the small colony they had conquered. It was just one world among thousands. Just one minor species among hundreds. But somewhere in the darkness between stars, 200 ships carried 20,000 humans toward, reckoning that no one expected. The galaxy was about to learn something it had forgotten. Humans were not weak. They had simply chosen to be peaceful. There was a difference. When humans came, the entire galaxy was forced to confront their wrath. Part 3. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Velthari territory. Before them lay Kethrin Station, a massive fortress that guarded the border. It bristled with weapons and shields. 60 Velthari warships patrolled around it, confident in their strength. Admiral Beak studied the tactical display and smiled grimly. The Velthari had prepared defenses for the kind of war they understood. Careful advances, strategic positioning, measured exchanges of fire. They expected humans to fight the same way every other species did. They were wrong. All ships be commanded. Attack pattern Fury. Execute. Oh Sungwon gripped the controls of her fighter as she launched from the carrier bay. She was 26 years old, the youngest squadron leader in the fleet. Her hands were steady, even though her heart pounded against her ribs. She had never flown in real combat before. None of them had. But she had seen the recordings from New Daegu. She had seen what the Valkyrie did to children. Fear had no room inside her. There was only purpose. Her squadron dove straight at the nearest Valkyrie ship, flying patterns that should have been impossible. Human pilots pushed their bodies to the breaking point, accepting forces that would make other species black out. They flew into spaces between enemy weapons that no sane pilot would attempt. They died, some of them, their fighters exploding in bright flashes. The survivors kept coming. The Valkyrie commander of Confront Station watched his tactical display with growing confusion. The humans were not following any known military doctrine. They were not protecting their flanks. They were not holding reserves. They were simply attacking with everything they had, accepting terrible losses. "They are insane," he muttered. "They will destroy themselves at this rate." But the losses were not one-sided. Human weapons tore into Valkyrie ships. Human tactics confused enemy targeting systems. And the humans kept coming, wave after wave, never slowing, never retreating. Deep in the engineering section of the Unyielding, Cho Mai-rei worked frantically at her console. She was an engineer, not a soldier, but she had spent the entire journey studying captured Valkyrie technology. Something about their shields had bothered her. A small irregularity in the frequency patterns. Her fingers flew across the controls as weapons fire shook the ship around her. Power conduits sparked. Alarms screamed. She ignored it all and focused on her calculations. There, she found it. The Valkyrie shields had a weakness. A tiny gap in their harmonic frequency that appeared for a fraction of a second during each power cycle. If human weapons could be timed to fire at exactly the right moment, they would pass through the shields as if they were not there. Mai-rei sent her findings to the bridge. Captain Ru Minho reviewed them for exactly 3 seconds, then broadcast them to the entire fleet. All ships adjust weapons timing to these specifications. Fire on my mark. 60 Valkyrie warships orbited Confront Station. 60 crews felt confident in their shields. 60 commanders watched the human attack with contempt. Then the next wave of human fire arrived, and 30 ships exploded. The Valkyrie formation broke. Ships that had never known fear suddenly understood it. They tried to reposition, to adapt, but the humans gave them no time. Wave after wave of attacks pounded through shields that should have held. Fighters swarmed through gaps that should not have existed. Oh Sungwon led her squadron through the heart of the enemy fleet. She had lost half her pilots already. The survivors flew with her anyway, trusting her, following her into the fire. They hit a Valkyrie cruiser from 3 angles at once, timing their shots to Murray's specifications. The cruiser's shields flickered and died. A moment later, the ship itself died. Sungwon felt no joy. Only grim satisfaction. Only the need to keep fighting until the job was done. Admiral Beak watched the battle unfold from the flagship. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes burned with cold fire. Every ship they lost was a knife in his heart. Every life spent was a debt the Valkyrie would pay. "Station shields are failing," his tactical officer reported. "They are requesting reinforcements. They will not receive them in time," Beak replied. "Focus all fire on the station." And this, Confront Station had stood for 300 years. It had never fallen to any enemy. Today, it fell to humans. The massive structure broke apart under concentrated fire, its reactors exploding in a chain reaction that lit up the darkness of space. The surviving, Valkyrie ships fled toward their home territory. The humans let them go. There was no need to chase them. They would carry the message home. The humans were coming, and nothing could stop them. On New Daegu, Commander Rethax received word of the battle with disbelief. Catherine's station was gone. The border fleet was scattered, and the humans were advancing faster than anyone had predicted. He immediately began fortifying his position. More troops landed from orbit. More defenses were built around the detention camps. The colonists were moved deeper into the compounds. Surrounded by guards and automated weapons, High Commander Velthox, the supreme military leader of the Dominion, gathered every available ship and moved to intercept the humans at New Daegu. He had studied the battle recordings. He had seen the impossible things human pilots did. He had watched ships with massive damage continue fighting instead of withdrawing. He did not understand it. No species fought like this. No species accepted such losses and kept attacking, but he was not afraid. He had 300 ships. The humans had barely 150 left after Catherine's station. Numbers would win in the end. They always did in the detention camp. Park Yuna heard whispers of the approaching battle. Guards spoke nervously among themselves, not realizing that some colonists understood their language. Word spread quietly through the human prisoners. Help was coming. Quan Taiho gathered trusted people in secret. They had no weapons, but they had hands and determination. When the time came, they would fight with whatever they had. A Valkyrie guard caught an elderly colonist stealing food from the supply depot. The man had been trying to feed the children in his section, who had not eaten in 2 days. The guard beat him in front of everyone, smashing his face against the ground until he stopped moving. Something broke inside. Quan Taiho. The years of military training vanished. The careful discipline disappeared. He moved before he knew he was moving. The first guard died with his neck twisted at an impossible angle. The second guard died with his own weapon shoved through his chest. The third guard died screaming as Taiho's hands crushed his throat. Then there were more guards, too many to fight, and they brought Taiho down with electric shocks and clubs. They beat him until he could not stand. They dragged him to Commander Rethax. "This one killed 3 of my soldiers with his bare hands," a guard reported. "He should be executed immediately." Rethax looked at the broken human on the ground before him. Blood covered Taiho's face. His arms hung at wrong angles. He could barely breathe, but his eyes still burned with hate. Public execution, Rethax decided. Tomorrow at dawn. Let the other humans see what happens to those who resist. He turned to walk away, then paused. Make sure they all watch. I want them to understand their place. That night, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace above. New Daegu, 147 ships, faced 300 Valkyrie warships. The odds were hopeless by any reasonable calculation. Admiral Beak opened a channel that broadcast to both fleets and to the surface below. His face appeared on every screen, calm and terrible. "You took out children," he said. "You burned our hospital. You put our people in chains." His voice grew colder with each word. "Now you will understand why the galaxy should have feared us. Now you will learn what happens when you hurt the people we love." He paused, and when he spoke again, his words were a promise and a threat. "We are coming for them. Every single one of them. And nothing you do will stop us." Below, in the detention camp, the colonists looked up at the sky. They could see the lights of ships gathering in orbit. They could feel the ground trembling from distant explosions. Park Yuna found Quan Taiho in the holding cell where he waited for execution. His face was swollen and purple. His breathing was wet and painful. But when she told him the fleet had arrived, he smiled. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you they would come." Above them, the Battle of New Daegu began. When humans came, The entire galaxy was forced to confront their wrath. Part 4. The sky above New Daegu burned with fire. High Commander Velthox watched the human fleet charge directly into his formation and felt confusion for the first time in his military career. He had set a trap. He had positioned his ships perfectly. Any reasonable enemy would have recognized the danger and retreated. The humans did not retreat. They flew straight into the heart of his fleet, accepting fire from all directions. Ships exploded. Crews died. And still they came, fighting with a fury that made no tactical sense. They are not even trying to protect themselves, Velthox muttered. What are they doing? His tactical officers studied the displays with growing alarm. They are fighting to reach orbit over the detention camps, High Commander. They are trying to land ground forces. Velthox understood immediately. The humans were not trying to win the space battle. They were trying to save their people on the surface. Everything else was secondary. Block them, he ordered. Destroy the transports before they can land. But the human warships formed a wall of fire around the transport ships. They took hits meant for the transports. They positioned themselves as shields, dying so that the landing craft could get through. Oh! Sunguan led what remained of her squadron in a desperate attack on the Vulturi ships blocking the landing zone. She had 4 pilots left out of 20. Her own fighter was damaged, one engine failing, her targeting systems barely functional. She did not turn back. Stay with me, she called to her pilots. One more run. Just one more. They dove at the enemy cruiser together, firing everything they had. The cruiser's shields flickered and died. Its weapons went silent. A moment later, human transports slipped through the gap and began their descent to the surface. Sunguan's fighter took a direct hit. Her cockpit filled with fire and smoke. She ejected just before the explosion, tumbling through space in her survival suit. Watching the battle continue without her, she had done her part. The rest was up to the ground forces. Sergeant M. Ha-Jun felt the transport shake as it entered the atmosphere. Around him, 300 soldiers checked their weapons and prepared for landing. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the best fighters humanity had, veterans of a dozen conflicts, volunteers who had asked for the most dangerous assignment. Remember the mission, Ha-Jun told them. We are here for the colonists. We protect them first, kill enemies second. Do not destroy buildings that might hold prisoners. Do not fire into crowds. Our people are down there. The transport hit the ground hard. The doors opened. Ha-Jun was the first one out. The Vulturi had fortified the area around the detention camps. Walls and guard towers and automated weapons covered every approach. It should have been impossible to attack. Ha-Jun attacked anyway. His forces spread out in small teams, each one moving toward a different section of the camp. They used buildings for cover. They avoided the open killing zones where Vulturi weapons could cut them down. They fought building by building, room by room, taking losses but never stopping. Dr. Yoon Sora followed behind the assault teams with her medical kit. She was 32 years old, a trauma surgeon who had volunteered for combat duty. Blood covered her uniform within the first 10 minutes. She worked without rest, treating wounded soldiers and wounded colonists alike, saving everyone she could. A Vulturi soldier burst through a door and aimed his weapon at her. She did not run. She did not scream. She simply looked at him with calm eyes and continued treating her patient. A human soldier appeared behind the Vulturi and killed him with a single shot. Dr. Yoon Sora nodded in thanks and kept working. In orbit. The battle continued. Admiral Beak had lost more than half his fleet, but the Vulturi had lost more. High Commander Velthox watched his ships die one by one and finally understood what he was facing. Humans did not fight for territory. They did not fight for resources or pride. They fought for each other. They fought with a love so fierce that death meant nothing to them. It was terrifying. We should negotiate, his advisor suggested. Offer to release the prisoners in exchange for a ceasefire. Velthox opened a channel to the human flagship. Admiral Beak, he said, we can end this. Give us safe passage, and we will release your colonists. We will withdraw from this world. There is no need for more death. Admiral Beak's face appeared on the screen. His expression had not changed since the battle began. Cold, focused, implacable. You had your chance for peace, Beak replied. You chose to kill our children instead. But surely, there is nothing to discuss. You will pay for what you did. All of you. The channel closed. The battle continued. On the surface, Sergeant Hajun's forces reached the main detention camp. Commander Rethax had placed guards on every corner, weapons aimed at the prisoners inside. If the humans attacked, the prisoners would die. Hajun studied the situation from behind a collapsed wall. He could see the colonists through gaps in the fence. Men and women and children, huddled together, waiting to see if they would live or die. He could also see Quan Taiho, chained to a post in the center of the camp. A Velthari executioner stood beside him, weapon ready. Commander Rethax had ordered the execution move forward. If he could not hold the camp, he would at least kill this troublesome human first. There was no time for a careful plan. No time for tactics or strategy. Hajun made a decision. Cover me, he said to his team. Then, he stood up and walked toward the camp. Gate, alone, unarmed, his weapon held over his head, and Surrender. The Velthari guards watched him approach with confusion. This made no sense. Humans had been attacking with suicidal fury for hours. Why would one of them surrender now? Rethax appeared at the gate, curious about this strange development. You wish to negotiate? He asked. No, Hajun said. I just needed you to look at me. Behind him, Dr. Yunsora and 3 other soldiers had used his distraction to cut through the fence at the back of the camp. They emerged among the prisoners, moving quickly and quietly, cutting chains and leading people toward the gap. Rethax realized what was happening a moment too late. He turned to order his guards to stop the escape, but Hajun was already moving. He covered the distance between them in 3 steps and drove, his combat knife into the commander's shoulder. The guards opened fire. Hajun took 3 hits but kept fighting. He had to give the prisoners time to escape. He had to hold the gate. Other soldiers poured through the front entrance, weapons blazing. The Velthari guards fell in waves. The executioner beside Taiho tried to complete his task, but a bullet from across the camp dropped him before he could fire. Park Yuna led the colonists through the chaos, guiding them toward the rescue transports landing nearby. Children cried. Adults stumbled. Some fell and had to be carried. But they kept moving, because humans were finally here to save them. Dr. Yunsora reached Quan Taiho and cut his chains. He could barely stand. His injuries were severe, possibly fatal without immediate care. She wrapped his arm over her shoulder and half carried him toward the transports. You came, he whispered. You actually came. Of course we did, she replied. You are one of us. We did not leave our people behind. Above them, High Commander Velthox watched his fleet die. More than 200 of his ships were gone. The humans had lost even more, but the survivors fought on with undiminished fury. They would not stop. He finally understood that now. They would fight until every ship was destroyed, until every soldier was dead, until nothing remained but burning wreckage. They would die to the last human rather than abandon their people. Velthox gave an order he had never given before. All ships, retreat. The Velthari fleet broke and ran. The humans let them go. Their mission was not conquest. Their mission was rescue. On the surface, the last of the colonists boarded the transports. Commander Rethax was captured alive, bound in chains, his shoulder bleeding from Ha-Jun's knife. He would face justice for what he had done. Sergeant Ha-Jun collapsed as the transport doors closed. Dr. Yoon Sora worked on him immediately, fighting to stop the bleeding from his wounds. He had taken 6 shots in total, any one of which should have killed him. He looked up at the ceiling of the transport and smiled. "Did we get everyone?" "We got everyone," Yuna confirmed. "Every single colonist is accounted for." Ha-Jun closed his eyes. "Good," he whispered. "That is good." The transports lifted off and rose toward the waiting fleet. Below them, the detention camps burned. The Veltari forces on the ground surrendered or fled. The Battle of New Daegu was over. Humanity had won. When humans came, the entire galaxy was forced to confront their wrath. Part 5. The recording spread across the galaxy within days. Every species with access to interstellar communications saw the Battle of New Daegu. They saw human ships flying into certain death without hesitation. They saw soldiers walking through fire to save strangers. They saw a species that had seemed weak and harmless transform into something terrifying. Representatives of 100 civilizations watched the recordings in silence. Some of them had laughed when Shin Yunji addressed the Galactic Council. Some of them had dismissed humans as a minor species not worth protecting. None of them were laughing now. Shin Yunji returned to the council chamber 3 weeks after the battle. The room was quiet when she entered. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. She walked to the central platform and stood where she had stood before, when no one had listened to her words. Now everyone listened. "You saw what happened," she said simply. "You saw what we did when you refused to help us. You saw what we are willing to sacrifice for our people." The Veltari ambassador's seat was empty. Kurthax had been recalled to his homeworld in disgrace. The Dominion government was desperately trying to negotiate peace before the human fleet reached their core systems. "We came to you for justice," Yunji continued. "You told us that no one cared what happened to humans. You were wrong. We care. We care enough to burn worlds. We care enough to die by the thousands. We care enough to never, ever give up." She looked around the chamber at the faces of species who had ignored humanity for decades. Some of them looked afraid. Some looked ashamed. All of them understood that the galaxy had changed. "We are not asking for help anymore," Yunji said. "We are telling you how things will be. The Veltari Dominion will surrender those responsible for the New Daegu massacre. They will pay reparations. They will formally apologize before this council. And if anyone else ever touches our people again, they will face the same consequences." No one argued. No one objected. The resolution passed unanimously. The human fleet remained at the edge of Veltari space, a silent threat that needed no words. Admiral Beak had lost more than half his ships and thousands of sailors. But he did not withdraw. He waited. The Veltari government contacted him within days. They agreed to everything. Commander Rethax would be handed over for trial. The Dominion would pay massive reparations. They would apologize publicly and abandon all claims to human territory. High Commander Velthox, who had survived the battle by retreating when defeat became certain, was stripped of his rank and expelled from military service. He had lost more ships in a single day than the Dominion had lost in the previous 50 years. His name became a curse among his people. But the Dominion's shame was not the most important change. The most important change was how the galaxy looked at humanity. Before New Daegu, humans were traders and farmers. They were peaceful creatures who avoided conflict. They were weak. They were safe. They were nothing to fear. After New Daegu, the truth was known. Humans were not weak. They had simply chosen not to fight. When that choice was taken from them, when their people were threatened, they became something else entirely. They became unstoppable. They became terrifying. They became warriors who would walk through fire for each other. The other species of the galaxy began treating humans differently. Trade agreements became more favorable. Territorial disputes were settled quickly and fairly. No one wanted to be the next species to discover what happened when humans got angry. On New Daegu itself, the survivors rebuilt their homes. The colonists who had been imprisoned returned to their farms and their families. The scars remained, both physical and mental, but life slowly returned to normal. A memorial was constructed where the hospital had stood. The names of every person who died in the attack were carved into white stone. Every year on the anniversary, ships from Earth arrived in orbit, and the entire colony observed a moment of silence. Admiral Beak attended the first anniversary ceremony in person. His white hair had grown thinner in the past year. The weight of command had taken its toll. But he stood straight and tall as he walked among the colonists he had helped to save. Park Yuna greeted him at the memorial site. She had recovered from her time in the camp, though the experience had left marks on her soul that would never fully heal. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything?" Beak shook his head. "I should have been faster. I should have saved more of them." "You saved all of us," Yuna replied. "Every colonist who was still alive when your ships arrived made it home. That is what matters." They stood together and looked at the names on the memorial. 300 people who had died in a single flash of light. Patients, doctors, nurses, children. Beak's jaw tightened. The anger never fully went away. He had learned to control it, to channel it into purpose, but it was always there. It would always be there. A small voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked down to see a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, looking up at him with curious eyes. "Are you the Admiral?" she asked. He knelt down so he could speak to her at her own level. "Yes, I am. My mom says you saved us from the bad aliens." Beak glanced at Yuna, who smiled slightly. "I had a lot of help," he said. "Many brave people worked very hard to bring everyone home safely." The girl considered this seriously. "Will the bad aliens come back?" It was a question Beak had thought about many times. The Velthari would never forget their humiliation. Other species might decide that humans were a threat that needed to be eliminated before they grew too strong. The galaxy was vast and old, and full of dangers that humanity had not yet encountered. "They might try," he said honestly. "But if they do, we will be ready." "Do you know why?" The girl shook her head. "Because we protect each other. When someone hurts one of us, all of us respond. That is what it means to be human." He stood up and looked at the sky, where ships from a dozen human worlds hung in orbit. "The whole galaxy knows that now. They will remember." The girl nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. She ran back to her mother, who watched the Admiral with grateful eyes. Quan Taiho stood nearby, leaning on a cane. His injuries had healed, mostly, but he would never be the same. He did not mind. He was alive. His people were free. That was enough. Han. Juju stood beside him, the young communications officer who had sent the message that brought the fleet. She had been promoted 3 times since the rescue and was now responsible for all communications on the colony. She still checked her console every morning to make sure no Velthari ships were in the system. Old habits died hard. Dr. Yoon Sora visited the colony regularly to check on her former patients. She had saved 37 lives during the ground assault, including Sergeant Hajun's. He had survived his wounds and was recovering on Earth. They exchanged letters sometimes. Neither of them talked about what they had seen. They did not need to. Oh Seung-Gwan returned to active duty after her rescue from space. She had been promoted to commander and given her own squadron. She trained her pilots harder than any instructor in the fleet. Survival rates improved significantly. Chomare's discovery about Velthari shield frequencies became standard tactical doctrine. Every human ship was equipped with weapons, calibrated to her specifications. The Valkyrie had already changed their shield designs in response, but Mireille was already working on ways to defeat the new version. Shin Yunji remained humanity's voice in the Galactic Council. She was no longer ignored or dismissed. When she spoke, the chamber fell silent and listened. As the anniversary ceremony concluded, Admiral Beak took one last look at the memorial. The names of the dead reminded him why humanity had fought, why they would always fight, not for conquest, not for glory, for each other. He looked up at the stars, at the vast galaxy full of ancient civilizations that had underestimated a young species from a small world. They will remember, he said quietly, and they did, for 1,000 years. The galaxy remembered the day humans came to save their own, the day a peaceful species showed its true nature, the day the entire galaxy was forced to confront human wrath. They remembered, and they were careful. They were very, very careful.